Hello, and welcome to the Good Readers Podcast, starring myself, Grant Barkley, and Joseph Green. Today we will be discussing the central theme of Slaughterhouse-Five and different stylistic elements the author uses and how they affect the theme.
Kurt Vonnegut's award-winning novel, Slaughterhouse-Five, revolves around Billy, a World War II veteran who gets abducted by aliens and is sent to the planet of Tralfamador, where he is put into a zoo to be observed by Tralfamadorians. These Tralfamadorians can see all through time, and therefore consider Earthlings blind, because they can only see one small speck of the space-time continuum.
The book focuses on Billy's experience in the war, especially his witnessing of the firebombing of Dresden. The author, Vonnegut, was actually a soldier who was at Slaughterhouse-Five during the bombing. The slaughterhouse was where the American prisoners of war were stored for safekeeping.
The theme of this novel is that death is a part of life, and it cannot be avoided.
Billy borrows a phrase from the Tralfamadorian Empire, "So it goes." This phrase refers to the belief of the Tralfamadorians that all time is one, and we all exist through all times in existence. There is no free will, there is no changing the future. It will all happen, so it goes.
Vonnegut uses this phrase whenever death is referenced or a character dies. For instance, at the start of the book, he says, "Tales of great destruction, brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. So it goes," on page 21.
The "so it goes" shows Billy's belief that no one is truly dead, because they exist throughout infinite parts of time. Therefore, death is not such a big deal. It is inevitable and will always happen.
He also describes a man who would later on hang himself while awaiting trial as a war criminal. So it goes, on page 28. He repeats this phrase of death and destruction in the past, present, and future, which is indicative of Billy's idea that everyone is alive at some point, and that's all that matters.
Billy strongly believes that everything that happens will and always will happen. This entails the theme of the book that death is a part of life.
Lots of people think of death as an end, but Billy knows otherwise. His experience with time travel and the Tralfamadorians taught him that a person dying isn't the end of their life. That person is still alive in the past. This causes him to have a sort of direct attitude towards death that may seem a bit abrupt. On page 214, he mentions one of his friends, Edgar Derby's death in passing, saying, "He was tried and shot. So it goes." Billy is unconcerned because he knows that he will eventually see Derby again when he time travels.
The repetition of "so it goes" emphasizes Billy's belief and the central theme of the novel that death is part of life.
Hold on. So just because the narrator says, "so it goes" a lot, doesn't mean that Billy Pilgrim believes death is a part of life. Also, he might just be crazy. Who says he can time travel? He's just a lunatic.
Well, maybe you're right, but regardless, Vonnegut's repetition of the phrase draws attention to the death, while at the same time showing the reader Billy's attitude. Did you know that "so it goes" appears in the book 106 times?
Well, whether he's crazy or not, that is a lot of death for one book. Experiencing that could definitely drive me insane.
Wow, we spent a lot of time talking about one phrase. Let's talk about one of Vonnegut's other techniques, his use of foreshadowing.
Well, with all the time travel involved, most of the foreshadowing is just describing things that have already happened.
Just because they happen for Billy doesn't mean they happen for us, the readers.
I guess so. How does he use his foreshadowing?
Well, on page 136, when Edgar Derby, the guy we talked about earlier, is being described, he's called Edgar Derby, the guy who would eventually be shot, by the narrator. Almost every time Derby is described, his death is mentioned.
I see. The repeating foreshadowing of Derby's death makes his death seem like the most important part of his life. It implies a sort of inevitability of death, since the narrator closely associates Edgar's death with the rest of his life.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. To the reader, Derby is that guy who gets shot, and nothing more, even though he's actually a fairly main character in the book. I think Vonnegut's intention wasn't to make Derby seem less of a person, but instead to make his death important. By the use of foreshadowing, he improves his theme of death being a natural part of life.
Oh, I found another example of foreshadowing. On page 165, Billy was inside the slaughterhouse, but he already knows that it was the next night that would be about 130,000 people in Dresden would die. Billy is well aware of most events in his life throughout the novel. This causes him to take what life throws at him with mild acceptance.
Yeah, he even has that attitude towards his own death. His experience with the Tralfamadorians taught Billy about the inevitability of everything, so he doesn't try to fight anything, even when approaching his own demise. When he's in the slaughterhouse and the Dresden firebombing is approaching, he didn't try to warn anyone, because he knew that those who would die would always die, and that their death was as inevitable as their life.
Oh yeah, And of course, that fits right in with the theme. Whether or not we have free will, Vonnegut uses repetition and foreshadowing to get his theme across to the readers. This book was pretty depressing, with all the death and destruction.
Well, remember the Tralfamadorian's philosophy. When a Tralfamadorian sees a corpse, all he thinks is that the dead person is in a bad condition at that particular moment. But that same person is just fine in plenty of other moments. Now, when I myself hear that somebody is dead, I simply shrug and say what the Tralfamadorians say about dead people, which is so it goes.